In this video, we're going to be taking a look at amines and amides. We're going to start our focus on amines first. So amines are basically just an ammonia molecule, and ammonia, remember, is NH3, where we replace some hydrogen with alkyl groups or aromatic alkyl groups. And so the amino functional group is the NH2 functional group. However, you don't need to have two H's. You could have one H and then a carbon chain, or no H's at all and just three carbon chains. So really, if you have N, and you can see R as a carbon chain to really make an organic molecule, you can have two more R groups. You could have, for example, N and H and only one R group. Okay. Either way, you can only have three things attached to the nitrogen all the time. That's it. And don't forget there are lone pairs in the nitrogen. We don't always represent them in the structures that we draw, though. So amines can be of three variety. They can be primary, secondary, or tertiary amines. The primary amines are amines where the nitrogen is only attached to one carbon chain, and then the rest is just hydrogen. So hydrogen there, hydrogen there. Secondary amine is where the nitrogen is attached to two carbon chains, so here and here, and then one hydrogen. And then tertiary amines is one where all the hydrogens from the ammonia have been replaced by carbon chains. So in other words, there are three carbon chains for tertiary amines. Remember that alcohols also had their designation for primary, secondary, tertiary, but it was a little bit different. So don't confuse the classification of amine, primary, secondary, tertiary, with alcohol, primary, secondary, tertiary, because it is a bit different. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the rules for naming and drawing amines, and then we'll do some practice problems together. The rules are all generally here. You can look at the rules as we do examples together, but essentially you want to find the longest carbon chain containing the nitrogen group, the amine group. And what you do is you would name that parent chain based on the number of carbons it has, and then change its ending to amine. And you do have to indicate where the amino group, which is the NH group, is located on which carbon. The other thing to keep in mind as well is that we do have substituents. So substituents, you would list them as you normally would. However, you also have substituents technically on your nitrogen. So if you have nitrogens, amines, where you have more than one carbon chain than a nitrogen, you have to list the smaller carbon chains on the nitrogen as substituents as well. And their location would be listed by the letter N, because they're located on the substituent on the nitrogen. So for example, here we have the longest chain is an ethane chain. On carbon number 1 is where we have our amino group. So it's an ethanamine molecule, but on the end there's a methyl substituent. So it's N-methyl ethanamine. Here we have a few more substituents. So our longest chain is 1, 2, 3. So it's propanamine. It's on carbon number 1 there. But we also have substituents, a methyl and an ethyl. So we have N-ethyl and methyl. So very similar to naming other compounds. It's just that when your substituents are on the N, you have to make sure that you list them as being on the N. Here you can see an amine where the longest chain is 3. It's a propanamine, but the nitrogen is located on carbon number 2 because you count this way, 1, 2, 3. So it's propan-2-amine. Here are some more examples of naming. This one here is a bit interesting because you have substituents not only on the N, but you also have some on the main carbon chain. And when you do that, you just have to make sure you list your substituents on the main carbon chain as well, as you typically would. So here you have on carbon number 2, you have your nitrogen. So you have heptan, or carbon number 3, sorry, heptan-3-amine. On the nitrogen, you have 2 methyls. And then on carbon 6, you have a bromine or a bromo. So we'll list in alphabetical order: 6-bromo, N-dimethyl heptan-3-amine. And so those are just some illustrative examples that show you the main rules above. And what you need to do is know how to explain those names based on their structure, and then also eventually come up with those names yourselves based on the structure that you see. A couple little things. If you have an amino group on a benzene ring. We call that benzamine parent chain with the carbon with the amino being carbon number 1. If there are higher priority functional groups present when there's an amino group present, then your amino group becomes an amino substituent. Generally, you'll see that amines are not that high in priority. They are higher than double, triple bonds, but they're lower than alcohols. So as soon as there's a hydroxyl group present, the amine becomes an amino group, and that's it. You don't name the parent chain as an amine. You name it as an alcohol, and then the amine would be an amino chain. So here we have a few examples. This is benzamine over here. Over here we have this being the highest priority. We have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 2-chloro, 5-nitrobenzamine. Don't confuse this with being an amine. This is simply a nitro substituent, and that nitro substituent is the same priority as alkyl groups, essentially. And here we have an example of a situation where we have a 1, 2, 3 carbon chain, but our highest priority is actually the OH here. So this is an alcohol. And when you're naming that, you want to try to get the lowest number possible for the alcohol. You could start either direction, but this direction is the better one because you're getting a low number for both this and this as well. And so our substituent is the amino group. So you have 1 amino, and then propan, 2, because we're on carbon number 2, all because the OH is an alcohol group. So those are the general rules for naming amines. If you know the general rules for naming amines, then you'll be able to do the examples here, which we'll cover in the next video. Before you go on to the next video, do understand what an amine is. It's the amino group. Understand there's different types of amines that exist. So we're going to classify the different types of amines based on primary, secondary, or tertiary. And understand that substituents can also be found on nitrogens, not only on the carbon chain.